Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Word of the Day podcast where useful words are pleasantly explained. My name is Jamie Silva, I am your host, and we've actually got a couple different words to feature today. They're related, and they're both pretty cool, but maybe not quite cool enough to warrant their own shows, so we're going to combine them here. The first word is the verb abdicate. In my view, this means to abandon a duty, responsibility, or position. And obviously, there's some amount of overlap between these things, since positions or jobs typically come with a given set of duties or responsibilities. So if I were to say, you know what, I'm tired of hosting this podcast. It's too much work and it's too stressful. Therefore, I'm going to quit. That would be me abdicating both my role as host of the show, as well as all of the responsibilities that go with it. Now, the online definition of abdicate goes like this, quote, to fail to fulfill or undertake a responsibility or duty, unquote. So this is okay, but I think it leaves out a critical detail in that it doesn't mention the idea of quitting something, just walking away. Like, it's quite possible to neglect a duty you have or refuse to do it temporarily while still remaining in whatever position or job carries that duty. This, I guess, still counts as abdicating in a technical sense, but it's more dramatic and I would argue much more common in ordinary usage to combine all these things into a single act, that is, the act of quitting. Just washing your hands of all your former responsibilities and leaving them undone or abandoned for someone else to do. Now, interestingly, the etymology of abdicate is reflected in the word's alternate definition, which goes like this, quote, of a monarch, to renounce one's throne, unquote. I guess this is kind of the ultimate abdication. Like, you're in charge of a whole country or maybe even an empire, and then at some point you're just like, you know what? It turns out ruling is really hard. I didn't ask for this. I was just sort of born into it. And why can't I just live a quiet life in the countryside without having to worry about managing court intrigue and quashing the democratic impulses of the citizenry? This is an appealing prospect, right? A pretty compelling case for abdicating the throne. And by extension, of course, abdicating all responsibilities pertaining thereto. In case you're wondering, the most recent and mildly prominent example of a king abdicating his throne that I came across, though there are, I'm sure, others, is King Edward VIII of Great Britain, who reigned from the time of his father's death in early 1936 all the way up until December 1936, at which point, as a consequence of his desire to marry an American divorcee causing all sorts of uproar in the royal court, he abdicated the throne. His replacement, incidentally, was King George VI, a monarch with a bit of a speech impediment, whose story is told in the fine 2010 film The King's Speech. Anyway, if you were to take abdicate all the way back to its Latin roots, it would mean basically the same thing, to officially renounce a public office. Rather oddly, the same Latin word, abdicare, could also mean to disown or disinherit with regard to one's heirs or children. I don't know if this more implies the Romans took public service extremely seriously, or that they didn't take disowning their children seriously at all. But in either case, the dynamics of rejecting something, of saying, it's not mine anymore, I will have nothing further to do with it, I think these apply in both cases. Today, the word applies to way more than resigning as a king or queen or from any other public office. And more generally, I would just add two more usage notes for abdicate. First, I think you kind of have to abdicate on purpose for it to count. Like, if producer Pete simply forgot to produce the show one day, I don't think that's abdicating. I mean, it might look like that at first, but it could have just been a temporary lapse or an honest mistake. If Pete were to really abdicate his role as producer, I would expect like a formal resignation letter, an announcement that he's put up with this idiocy for far too long and he isn't going to take it anymore, that sort of thing. While it isn't exactly necessary, the more formally you quit something, the more it looks like an authentic abdication. There are also cases where someone might be kind of forced to abdicate thanks to a scandal of some kind, but ultimately it's still up to them, right? They have to intentionally quit or stop doing whatever it was they were supposed to. The second usage note, and this is related, is that abdications are typically total. So a person abdicating a position wouldn't say like, I'll keep these couple responsibilities, but not those ones. No, just like beggars, abdicators can't be choosers. If they're out 100%. Now, instead of going straight to the examples for abdicate, I want to delve into our second word today, which is the adjective derelict. In that scenario I just described, if producer Pete straight up quit, right, that would be abdicating. But if instead he just shirked for a little while or left something undone by mistake, that would qualify as being derelict. Because in my mind, that's exactly what derelict means. Neglecting duties, tasks, or responsibilities, often without warning or explanation, but also without formally quitting the position or outright refusing to do what's expected of you. The online definition of derelict, which I'll pull from Merriam-Webster, goes as follows, quote, lacking a sense of duty, negligent, unquote. And by the way, there are a couple other meanings of derelict that are perfectly legitimate and at least somewhat common these days, but they aren't the focus of today's show, so I'm just going to leave them alone here. Now, the phrase in which derelict most frequently appears is this one, derelict in one's duty, which makes sense. But if derelict means something pretty close to negligent, then it's reasonable to ask, like, negligent in what way? What is being shirked here? And you can kind of be broad here and just say duties or responsibilities and leave it at that, or you can be a little more specific and talk about how, say, your neighbors are being derelict in their trash duties by frequently failing to promptly bring their bins back from the curb after they've been emptied. As far as the etymology goes, derelict also comes from Latin, where derelictus meant solitary or deserted, especially with regard to ships that had either been abandoned at sea for some reason or were stuck on a beach somewhere. Now, I should say that the contemporary meaning of derelict isn't nearly as strong as this. Like, there's a certain finality about a ship being abandoned out on the ocean or on an island or whatever. But if you're derelict in a duty, I mean, who knows? Maybe you just forgot, played hooky, or weren't sufficiently motivated at the time. But you'll be back at it tomorrow. These might not be the likeliest explanations, of course, but they're very possible, and the word derelict recognizes that possibility. Now, as you can probably tell, derelict is used pejoratively most of the time. Obviously, calling someone negligent, a shirker, or a quitter is not a compliment. But in the case of abdicate, there may be very good reasons for quitting, which means the word can just be neutral, without any negative connotations. Okay, let's finally get some examples of how to use abdicate and derelict in ordinary conversation or writing. Example number 1. Roy was extremely derelict when it came to cleaning the pool. He left it undone for weeks, insisting that it was more authentic and closer to nature to swim amongst a few leaves and the occasional algae patch. Like a pond in a beautiful forest, Roy liked to say, all natural and unsullied by human hands. Example number 2. The wedding DJ had been given very clear instructions to play a rollicking Michael Bublé number as a prelude to the cake cutting. Unfortunately, he was derelict in this duty, as he was distracted by the urgent task of acquainting himself with the bridesmaids. Example number 3. Percy had been a guide at the Modern Art Museum for nearly 2 decades, but he was forced to abdicate the position after explaining to a group of rapt museum-goers the nuance, profundity, and inscrutable yet undeniable brilliance of a pile of candy corns someone had spilled next to an exhibit. And lastly, example number 4. "Excuse me, everyone," said Benjamin solemnly to those seated around the conference table. "I have an announcement to make, please." 4 change months ago, as you all know, I was elected to serve as General Secretary of the California Cupcake Association, and it has been my honor and privilege to do so. At this time, however, it is with great pain but equal resolve that I must announce I will be abdicating this position. Why, you might ask? Well, frankly, I have been much troubled by this body's increasing tolerance of quote-unquote icing-free cupcakes, which I will forever maintain are merely muffins, and thus are wholly unfit to grace the walls of our Cupcake Hall of Fame. In addition, it is an open secret that many CCA members, several of whom are in this very room, have disgraced our traditions and violated our bylaws by leaving cupcake wrappers and associated debris from sprinkles and other toppings around their seats after meetings, as well as in our offices. Worst of all, the offenders are neither punished nor even reprimanded. Benjamin paused for a moment, looking around the room sternly before continuing. If this organization is no longer committed to serving the cupcake-loving community and serving and eating cupcakes in a manner consistent with our values, then I no longer wish to lead it. Thus, I am stepping down, effective immediately, and in fact, I will be leaving this organization altogether. For the last time, ladies and gentlemen, may I utter the cherished motto of my beloved CCA, all for cupcakes, cupcakes for all. Thank you. Okay, that will, I think, be all for us today. I'm very thankful to all of you listeners for neither abdicating your role as listeners, nor being derelict in the duties of being a listener. The main duty, of course, being simply listening to the show, which is very easy. There's very little to it. But for now, though, this is Jamie Silva saying so long from the RAV4 Studios. We hope you enjoyed this edition of the Word of the Day podcast, and we'll see you next time.